My name's Monica Contreras. My pronouns are she and hers. I just wanted to say thank you so much for having me here. I love discussing policy and especially art policy. I consider myself an artist first before talking about politics, but those are things that are infused. Politics and art are infused together. I am running for Congress. It's a federal level position. I don't think of local, state, or Congress in a hierarchical way. They're all next to each other, and like marble, all of the lines kind of move together. Is how each policy touches on one another. And if I can quickly, I love the conversation that was before, and I just want to touch on two things. One thing that was mentioned was unhoused people and how our mayor is currently treating unhoused people. Something that people should always remember, unhoused people are constituents, first and foremost. And we need to think of them like that. If you're undocumented, if you're not a voter, you're still a constituent. Your public safety should be prioritized. So I want people to stop thinking them as others. And as far as sexual education is concerned, we don't do a good job with sex education in pre-K through 12. And why is that important? It's important because having sexual education, one that is inclusive and comprehensive, one that is not cisgender-centered, that's hetero-centered. It gives people self-esteem, helps people with the boundaries of their body, lets people feel good about themselves and know how to advocate for respect for themselves. And this is something that's missing. And by the way, if we don't have this, what happens? This is something why we have sexual abuse. This is why we have rampant STDs. This is why we have no self-esteem in our bodies. We can talk to kids of all ages about boundaries. Children as young as 6 months old notice differences. This has been a study that came out by Sesame Street, by the way. And at 6 months, they can look at their skin color and say, that seems to be different. And they want to know. And unfortunately, in this country, when we don't have comprehensive sex education, those questions become unanswered, and then children find answers for themselves. And sometimes those answers aren't always great, and they're not always informed, and they can be very harmful. So I'm a big advocate for moving us into those places without fears, so that we don't feel awkward about our bodies and how we function. Okay. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, of course. I do want to ask how your interest in art has impacted your policy making and your interest in politics.
Sure.
First and foremost.
So I'm actually from 4 generations of artists. My great-great-grandfather, Belisario Ramon Francisco Chavez y Contreras, is from South America, from Valparaiso, Chile. And he played horns in the Navy. My grandfather, Belisario Contreras Jr., he was a painter. He was actually in the Ghost Army, which actually just got a congressional medal about a month ago. They did tactical diversions against Hitler using fake tanks and sound effects. They saved about 8,000 people's lives. These were all artists. You can actually see the documentary. My grandfather's in it. He's holding flowers. My mother was a seamstress, a jewelry maker. And because of that, I grew up in a household that didn't see art as a hobby. We saw it as something that is precious, that feeds life. It connects us to everything. It's something to be taken seriously and not seriously. The rainbow of emotions with art. And so I live in New York because I want this town to appreciate artists in the way that it should, and it's not doing that right now. It's not doing that with the policies that we currently have and don't have. And it's one of the reasons I wanted to run at the federal level. Because my grandfather actually taught at American University, and one of the things that he taught was New Deal art. And it was the first time our federal government made real investments in artists. And it was the last time the federal government made real investments in artists. And what happened with the federal New Deal? The Harlem Renaissance came out of it because of some of the money that was infused there. That was about as diverse as they got with the allocation of that money, which is really just to Harlem. The rest was mostly white male painters, but it showed us what federal funding could do for art, is that they could be really really move us into big movements. And so I would like to see those investments again. You can't call New York City the cultural capital of the world if you're not investing in its art. So that's what brought me, I would say, that's not necessarily what brought me into politics, though. What brought me into politics is, as a child, I was raised by a single mother. We grew up on welfare. We were unhoused for a short amount of time. I lived in a storage facility with my brothers. And my mom worked full time, and we couldn't get by. And so all the mythology of like, if you just work hard enough, you're going to get by. And I saw that, it was during that time where the government has, I would say the government's been cutting back on social safety net for decades now. But it was at a place where my mom made $1 too much for us to get on food stamps at one time, and then we lost our house, and then we qualified for food stamps, you know? So I started seeing as a child immediately how the federal government's policies were directly impacting us. It was later that I would find out that our federal government, the last minute, Nixon, vetoed a Universal Child Care Act, which would have pulled millions of people out of poverty, just like that. And it passed both houses of Congress. It was on his desk, and he said at the last moment he'd like to keep women at home in a nuclear family, which never really existed, right? So that impacted my family, and that impacts everybody's family that's here. If you had a parent that had to leave you alone because they couldn't afford to hire a babysitter, that's because of that. So that's what brought me to wanting to run at the federal level.
So branching off of sort of the first part of that question, how exactly are you taking steps to elevate the voices of BIPOC, queer, and disabled artists in particular?
Well, I'm Black, Latina, and bisexual, so I'm elevating my own self as much as
but I think I've never thought of that as separate. I've always centered Blackness, queerness, disability in every policy that I think of. I was having a conversation with Segunda and Anthony earlier about disability policy. I like to focus on groups that are historically disenfranchised because of policy. Hi, Victor. One of the things that I cannot stand in this country is when people just say, oh, marginalized people. People aren't marginalized. They've been pushed to the margins by really bad policy. None of us would be in a marginalized position if we had policy that actually created equity. So I would say that I center people that have been pushed furthest to the margins by bad policy. And that can be immigrant, that can be queer, that can be Black, Asian, Jewish. It depends on, where I see there is harm in a piece of policy. I hope that makes sense.